In March 2021, a large-scale sandstorm set off from the Gobi in central Mongolia, swept all the way to the capital city of Ulaanbaatar, and continued directly into northern China, covering the Yanshan Mountains to the Heshi Corridor in grey and yellow. Sandstorms of this magnitude can make headlines in China every time, but they have long been commonplace in Mongolia, with as few as 5 or 6 a year, and as many as 30 or more throughout the country. In 2023, nearly half of China's sandstorms originated in Mongolia, and the scale of the storms was so large that they reached South Korea and Japan. However, Mongolia itself has suffered the most from the sandstorms. The sandstorms are destroying steppes and expanding the deserts. The steppes, which used to be full of sheep and cows, became totally bare and degraded to sandy areas, which continue to damage more steppes. In fact, it has become a sustainable vicious circle. Even the capital, Ulaanbaatar, has been recognized by the World Health Organization as the city with the worst air pollution on several occasions. Who can be blamed for such a big problem? First of all, we can blame on natural disasters, the arid and hot Mongolian plateau, and global warming. Mongolia is located in the interior of Asia. Although only separated from the Pacific Ocean by northeast China, the monsoon winds of East Asia stop at the Greater Khingan Range, so Mongolia can't look to the ocean for water. Ulaanbaatar's annual precipitation is only 290 millimeters, and the Gobi provinces in the south are only a little over 100 millimeters, which is not enough to evaporate. Moreover, between 1940 and 2015, Mongolia's average temperature rose by 2.24 degrees Celsius, while annual precipitation decreased by 7%, making it the hardest hit by global warming. With such harsh conditions, the population carrying capacity is bound to be extremely low. There are only 3.5 million people in Mongolia, less than a seventh of the population of Xinjiang, which is negligible in the overcrowded East Asian countries. But poor natural conditions can only take part of the blame. In fact, Mongolia's environment has only gradually collapsed in the last 4 decades. This has been accompanied by the exploitation of agricultural livestock, a mining boom, the intoxication of the wealthy and powerful, and the uncontrolled expansion of the illicit sex trafficking. This is an archetypal example of a society with severely inadequate governance, equipped with contemporary resources, pillaging vulnerable territories collectively from the affluent to the impoverished. Let's turn the clock back 40 years to a time when Mongolia's economy was heavily dependent on the Soviet Union and had limited industrial capacity, roughly equivalent to an oversized ranch. From 1940 to 1990, the total number of livestock in Mongolia was maintained at around 25 million animals. Although there was a gradual trend towards land degradation, it wasn't too much of a problem, at least on the surface. The turning point came in 1990 when the Soviet Union was in trouble. Mongolia's top brass saw that something was wrong and took the first step towards socio-economic reforms. A year later, the Soviet Union collapsed and Mongolia lost its biggest donor, so reforming earlier was the right judgment. But getting it right is not the same as getting it done. In the past, people used to slack off when they worked for the government. Now that the land has been privatized, everything is looking towards money. For the chronically poor herders, the easiest way is to put more effort into grazing. By 2023, Mongolia's livestock population is rapidly jumping from 25 million to 70 million, with tens of millions more predators. The grasses are feeling more pressure. In the meantime, Mongolia's time-tested herding tradition is also being messed up. For a long time, the people on the steppe have worked out the grazing habits of cattle, goats, sheep, camels, and horses, which are the 5 animals of the steppe. Horses like to eat grass seeds and the top of the grass. Cows use their tongues to roll the grass to eat. Cows and horses have higher requirements for the quality of the pasture, and the grasses recover faster. Sheep and goats, on the other hand, eat the lower part of the grass and eat it cleaner. Especially goats, they also like to eat the roots. Meadows swept by goats take longer to restore to the original state. Herdsmen on the steppe have achieved thousands of years of sustainable grazing by regulating the ratio of the 5 animals and by moving them around in different seasons. But times are different now, as everything is money-oriented, so what should be raised should be the one that earns more. As cashmere became a worldwide sensation, selling goat's wool was more lucrative than sheep's milk and goat's meat. As a result, The proportion of goats in Mongolia has increased from 18% to about 40%. It's not a bad way to make money. In fact, the so-called destruction first, restoration later is almost unavoidable in the development of all countries. The Ganges River has also been drained by the Indians. But we have to admit that the resilience of the environment to withstand continuous exploitation is different. Monsoon climate zones have stronger resilience than temperate continental climates. If India has achieved industrialization, with the self-purifying capacity, the Ganges can be gradually restored. But Mongolia is not that lucky. The balance between steppe and desert is too fragile, and the slide into a deep, vicious circle would be irreversibly damaging. There are many precedents of such tragedies in Central Asia and the Middle East. However, if we look at the structure of Mongolia's exports, we can see that animal hides and skins, the biggest part of the livestock industry, accounts for a little more than 3% of the total exports. In other words, the irreversible destruction of pasture land has resulted in only 3% of total exports. The country's real wealth lies in the sales of minerals. In Mongolian media's words, this is something that even a child knows. Exploitation of pastures is the only way for ordinary people to get out of poverty. That's the nature of how this country got to this point. Although Mongolia is short of water, it is not short of mines, and there are super mines one after another. Erdenet copper mine, after decades of mining, can still produce 450,000 tons of copper concentrate per year, which is definitely the top capacity in China. In 2001, a Canadian company discovered the world-class Oyu Tolgoi mine in the Inogovi province, which is as large as the city of Ulaanbaatar, with considerable reserves of copper, gold, and silver. In the meantime, Mongolia has 31 million tons of rare earth reserves, second only to China, and a tenth of the world's coal reserves, including the world's largest coking coal mine, Tavan Tolgoi. Countries like Australia, Canada, and Norway have proven time and time again what a great asset resource export can be for a country with a small population. Mongolia is quite similar to an outback version of Australia, rich on the surface. Unfortunately, the two countries are heaven and hell sitting on the same mine. Australia's GDP per capita is $65,000, while Mongolia is just over $5,000. Mongolia's population density is only 2/3 that of Australia, but GDP per capita can be more than 10 times lower. In developed countries, the money from the sale of mines can improve the environment, reduce the income squeeze on society as a whole, and develop downstream equipment manufacturing and fine chemicals, creating more high-paying jobs. But in Mongolia, selling mines is more like a resource curse, which further magnifies the greed of vested interests. It's too complicated to cultivate domestic industries, so it's better to contract out to foreign investors and collect rents, which directly opens the door to corruption and rent-seeking. In 2022, Mongolia's anti-corruption department found that 6.5 million tons of coal in Tavan Tolgoi didn't match the import and export figures. This can be viewed with more than 100,000 wagons, which can be connected from Ulaanbaatar to Beijing. As a result of the investigation, the former president, former ministers, and former governors, down to the supervisors of railway stations, all of them were implicated. The revenue from the sale of mines keeps flowing into the pockets of a few, while at the same time, the country does not even have the money to upgrade its infrastructure. As a country with no shortage of coal at all, Mongolia has a 20% deficit in its electricity system. Rio Tinto, which mines in Oyu Tolgoi, has to buy electricity from Inner Mongolia. While the money from the mines does not fall into the lower classes, the environmental damage caused by mining is borne by all. While goats only graze on the surface, mining destroys the entire surface of the earth, which is very costly to repair. Moreover, mining is very water intensive. For example, Oyu Tolgoi consumes 3 million tons of water per month, which is equivalent to using up a West Lake in less than 5 months, and its impact is much larger than the mine itself. In addition, many large mines are located in the southern Gobi region, where water is scarce, which will drain the groundwater of the area. This shows that under such social structure in Mongolia, from the top to the bottom, from mining to pastoralism, there is no mercy in the extraction of land. As a result, nearly a quarter of the country's land has been severely degraded, and the herbaceous biomass of many steppes is less than half of what it was a few decades ago. This is particularly acute in Wu's province and several Gobi provinces, directly undermining the foundations of farming and herding. Unable to make ends meet, farmers and herders, especially young people, are flocking to the capital. Half of Mongolia's 3.5 million people are in Ulaanbaatar, and 3/4 are young adults, who only come here if they want a small trickle of money from the rich. But the capital is not a place you can just live in. The average house price is more than $964 per square meter, and rents cost thousands of dollars, which can lead to the emergence of yurt slums in Ulaanbaatar, which account for up to 60% of the city's population. On satellite maps, the gap between rich and poor is visible, giving the impression of a nomadic army moving south towards the capital. There is no decent municipal planning and construction in such a large area of slums, while the winter on the steppe is unusually cold. If you don't want to freeze to death, you have to burn coal, and if you can't afford to buy coal, then you can buy cow dung, discarded tires, or even dry rubbish. So the biggest source of pollution in Ulaanbaatar, rather than sandstorm, the pollution is caused by emissions from the slums. But the city is surrounded by the mountains. Pollutants are not easy to spread. The haze often lingers for a long time. Although the city center where the upper class lives is relatively better, the result of this kind of poisoning has indeed been the last resort of the poor. Of course, the rich and powerful have a sense of crisis. In 2005, Mongolia launched the Great Green Wall program to plant a belt of protected forests in southern Mongolia. In 2021, President Kurusuk proposed the Billion Trees program to plant all the trees in Mongolia by 2030. The names of these projects are impressive, but in reality they have not been well implemented due to lack of organizational capacity. The Asian Development Bank recommended that Mongolia should implement environmental laws and regulations in its report. In short, because Mongolia's environment is extremely fragile, the destruction first, restoration later approach is likely to lead to irreversible environmental collapse. Class divisions and polarization are exacerbating the harm between society and the environment, as well as within society. From the steppe to the Gobi, from provinces to the capital, from the common man to the powerful, no one is immune. Perhaps the only good news is that Mongolia's low population density gives the country some room to adjust, but only if wealth distribution and social security are reformed. Reaching out to the interests can solve a lot of problems, but how hard can it be? This is the second episode of the GeoKnowledge Group's Let the Earth Take a Breath series. We will focus on various major environmental issues from the perspective of geography. We will analyze the nature behind the environmental collapse, where it came from and where it is going. Thank you for your support. See you next time.